Hi, this is David Wolinsky, back with another interview from the audio archives of Don't Die. This time I'm bringing to you the second half of my Q&A with Laura Ruggiero, who's a filmmaker, screenwriter, and self-proclaimed story hacker based in Buenos Aires, Argentina. She and I spoke on February 9th, 2018. And just a quick reminder, if you would like to read transcripts of other interviews I've done through the last few years, you can hop on over to nodon'tdie.com, where you'll also see a link to my Patreon, which helps support this work I've been doing independently. Thanks for listening and reading, and now, here's Laura Ruggiero. Well, I had also seen that you went to the Werner Herzog Rogue Film School, Is that right?
Yeah.
And I had read an interview with him where he was talking about his thoughts about VR, where he said that VR is likely not going to be an extension of cinema or 3D cinema or video games, but something completely new, completely its own thing. I mean, do you agree? Is there a certain type of experience that you are trying to capture with VR that you can't do in another medium?
Well, I hope so, because if I can do it in some other medium the same way and I can get the same results, I would do it definitely in film, because it has more years of development and of language. So I think VR has to become its own thing. And it's not here to replace anything. It's not here to replace our video games. It's not here to replace our screens or film. It has to become its own thing. But I think that's a process. And also, well, if we're talking about Werner Herzog, he's a very curious man.
Yes.
And basically, at first, I remember talking with him about VR, which was in 2014. So it was very new. And he had, at first, he had no idea about that. But he had no idea about also like installations and creating different new media installation with his work. And at first he rejects everything, but then he gets curious, and he has no clue about technology, but he's also so curious. And you can see it in all his films. He picks a topic and then makes a film just to research it. And I think that's amazing. And I would love to see him really explore the medium, and also I also share the idea that it will become its own thing. Will it be like as big as any other medium? I don't know. Right now, not only the language has to evolve, but also the technology. It's still quite uncomfortable to have a headset in your head and be completely separated of the world around you, and not have a cool social experience with that. So there are many ways this could evolve, and I'm just trying not to rush into any of them. Just see what happens. I totally feel that in my personal experience, I really love anything that it's computer generated. I don't find 360 video so challenging right now. I don't see it, if you don't have interaction, I don't see it as interesting for me. That's very personal. But I think the more we create stories that we can only live in virtual reality, and you are there as a visitor to that world, and that you be able to interact and really feel things that you cannot feel just by staring at a TV screen or a film screen. That's something that I find it really, really, really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and you had said too that, we're still in these early days where there's more questions than even theories or even answers. So I'd be curious to hear you just talk about, what you think of the leadership on the things that you care about in these overlaps. I mean, who do you look to and say that, oh, this person speaks for the things that I care about?
You mean like in the teams that are created for?
Well, I mean, are there people who you follow what they have
Oh,
to
okay.
say about? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
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 Or they challenge what you already think, or they've changed your mind, or they inspire you.
All right. Yeah. First of all, like Jessica Brilhart from Google. She just left Google and is creating her own company, and she was one of the first ones that really kind of like stopped for a minute and thought about language and how we edit in VR and what are like the new rules and how do we call this experience. She was for me one of the first one that had the idea that this has to be designed and wrote about it and shared information about it. And for me, she's one of the most brilliant minds in the industry at this moment. Not so much for the content she creates as for VR pieces, um, but for because she worked a lot with 360 video. But for the pieces that she's writing in terms of language, in terms of understanding the new medium, in terms of challenging the new medium, and also in terms of not taking it so seriously. I think she's brilliant. I also look to whatever Sundance is doing in terms of the program they have, the New Frontiers program with Kamal Sinclair. I think they have some of the most interesting creators at this moment in their programs, creating virtual reality and creating all sort of emerging media stories. And in terms of creators per se, I really love what Marshmallow Laserfish from the UK are doing. I think the some of the pieces they created are really beautiful.
Well, one of the lenses that I bring to this is stuff about game culture and game industry, and so I wonder. I mean, do you run into that where people have sort of video game expectations, either of your work or with VR in general in your workshops, where you find that that's sort of a language they're trying to truck in?
Yeah, everyone wants to make a video game, and I think that's why 360 video it's frustrating for so many people because you are giving the user the opportunity to transfer them to another world, and then you don't give them the choice or the ability to interact with that world. And
Right.
and I think all our filmmaking baggage and all our video gaming baggage in society in general, both of them are quite strong. So whenever you're in a VR experiences, the first thing you ask yourself is like the first thing you ask yourself is who I am. Like if you look at yourself and to see if you have hands or feet and to understand what kind of character are you in the story, if you are a character. And then the second thing is what can I do? And that's driven by video games. Like you need a mission, you need to be able to interact with that.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say the second question is where is the gun?
Also, yeah, it's like, well, you look at your
Yes.
hands
Okay.
and then it's like, and I think that narrative, it's there to explore. In Latin America in general, I think we need more, even though there's a very good, a great organized gaming industry in Argentina, but in general, we need more interactivity design teachers and narrative design teachers and people that need to learn that craft that are not only working because I'm not saying we don't have those, but they are working just in the video game industry, and the video game industry it's hybridating with the film industry, with VR industry. So I think we need more training on that. And for sure, all the students that they want to create virtual reality, it's a challenge to explain them, well, when we are creating experiences that they can interact and when not, and why do we want to interact, and how do you really design that interaction, and also make them explore like different types of games, that they are not only point and shoot, and that are more exploratory, that you don't only get a enjoy the game because you're like trying to fulfill a mission, but also you're just enjoying being in that story, being in the story world, like the design of the whole world per se. But I think there's a lot of interest on that, and I think this VR thing of the future is not going to be either. It's not going to be, oh, it's a game or it's a movie. It's going to be its own thing that has like elements from like all those, from games, from film, from theater, from music, from sociology, from a lot of fields.
Well, I was going to ask, I mean, it's funny you use the word baggage, because I was going to ask about, VR sort of being a synthesis of different industries and fields. I mean, what baggage are you hoping that it will leave behind from where it was sort of formed or came from?
First, I think it's still very difficult for some directors to think that directing that comes directly from film. Directing a film is framing, is having the possibility to frame a scene, and I think that has to be translated into, the director in this case is a storyteller that is not necessarily has to frame something, but it has to create a space where that story takes place. The creation of the story world, not seeing that the fact that you give the user the possibility to choose what they are looking at makes you less of a director. So the idea that ego, related aspect of directing, I think that has to be, dropped. In general, in all type of like digital storytelling, it's mostly a collaborative effort of many people. Sometimes when you see, I understand the whole author theory of film, right? It's like, okay, film by, but if you think about it, it takes so much time. It takes so many people, to make a big film, that it's so selfish to say that it's your own film. It's not just the film of the director. It's a film created by many, many people. And I think in terms of digital storytelling, that switch into something more personal and into something that is creative with many other talents, that's something I look forward to see. And also the idea that whatever technology comes next is going to kill the previous one, and we've seen that it doesn't really happen. TV, radio, it still exists. TV still exists. Now we buy records, but we still have Spotify. I think there's
it's all added. It's all additive, right?
There's a space for everything. There's also the understanding that it's like a wave, everything, and reaches a certain point and then it finds its own space. So the idea of, okay, the creators that are exploring new mediums are like killing the previous one, or are supposed to be working in VR and you cannot go back to something more traditional, I would love to see that disappear for sure.
Well, you had also mentioned paying attention to video game industry or culture, and I just would be curious to hear you talk about what interests you about it, and sort of where you find it loses you, or you just find you can't relate.
Well, I don't see myself as a gamer.
Yeah.
Um, and when I look at video games, and sometimes I play video games, uh, also all the time more driven to understanding the story. So I look at the characters, I look at the settings, I look at the colors, I look at what's going on. I love the presentation, and I suck at gaming. It's like because my attention is like in love with all those details, um, and I see how like some films are starting to look at like video games. Some video games are starting to look more like films. If you see any
Yep.
presentation of any video game lately, it's like, okay, it's a movie, really, and the way they're communicating that, it's the movie. So I think it's a really really interesting industry. It's an industry that at some point I would love to uh, work with in terms of creating the stories. For me, it's always about that.
Hmm.
But I understand that it also requires the different skills. But I think it's fascinating, and it's fascinating how there's so many creators that are like transferring from both industries, that are like, we need in VR or in film, we need people that understand technology better, and that usually comes from video games, and in video games, people that understand the complexity of characters or the complexity of storytelling, and there are a lot of people that are, from film, and again, I don't see that as like a competition. Uh, I see that
No.
parallel industries that are, have their own background and their own idols and their whole worlds around it.
What's the last game you played that made you uh, rethink something about humanity, or made you reflect on something about your own humanity?
Uh, I've been actually like last 2 weeks I've been playing arcade, really.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I've been like, yeah, playing very you know, retro beat games. Um, in terms of, for me, it's like, again, it's like the story. I've been working a lot, not in video games right now, but with the whole Dungeons and Dragon workshops that we are creating for South by Southwest, which is actually, it's not going to be a D&D session, but it's going to be a world building session. And for me, what I get from games uh, is like, I love the position that the gamers get into when they are playing, like this whole idea of intense concentration, the idea of understanding consequences, that you do something and in a game, you either win, lose, get points, but it's very practical and obvious that you see that idea of consequences. So problem solving, um, the idea of, the resilience of, trying again and again and again till you figure it out. And I also love, even though it's an arena that I'm not into it, but the whole idea of online gaming and creating games that you collaborate with other users. And when I look at games in general, video games or role playing games, I see all that, and I think that's what I find it like really fascinating, and I'm trying to learn as much as I can on that, because I believe that all these skills and all these consequences of playing a game uh, are really like a very interesting skill to have, to be able to concentrate a lot, to be able to solve problems, to be able to understand consequences. And I think that it has to, it needs to be used more in schools. It needs to be used more to understand what's going on socially. And I see games as movies as a great way to train all that. You know, to train how you solve problems. Well, but you can solve problems in a D&D session, or you can create characters in a D&D session. Um, and I think that's, for me, I would say it's the most fascinating thing. Uh, and like I said, I've been playing a lot of retro games, and I've been reading a lot about role-playing games, and that's what makes me, reflect about, okay, this is really really cool tool um, to put it to use, and to help teachers understand gaming as a tool they have on their side, and include it in the classroom. I mean, if you could teach history with D&D campaigns for a whole year, I think that would be awesome.
There's a couple of books I can recommend. I don't know how much you've read or dug into that, but there's a couple of books on that topic exactly that are actually pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we were also talking about just old baggage, and this is something we had emailed about not long ago, which is just about how people like to talk about representation, but meaningful support is scarce. So I guess I would just be curious to hear you talk about how did you start to realize that support is scarce, that there's an actual pattern to it, and it's not just a couple of fluke instances.
Well, you realize whenever you get invited to a film festival, to be a speaker somewhere, and you don't have the means to travel, and that's a first one. And at some point, you make the effort and go because you think it's important for your career. But then for example, when I reach those stages, I understand that it's not only important for me, as a filmmaker, as a speaker, as a creator, but it's also really important for other people to see people from different backgrounds. It's really great to be, to speak about the topics that I love, and to see girls from Latin America saying, "Oh, I didn't know I could be that. I didn't know I could, work in video games or in technology. I didn't know I could apply all my love for tech, for the arts." And then when you see that and you experience that, you realize that it's not only like the individual, quest to go to all these places, but it's also something that really makes an impact. But if you ask me, it's really really difficult to get, if you don't get like the support from the festival or from the institution that they really invite you to do that, to get support from companies, from like cultural institutions, it gets really really difficult. And right now I see that there's a lot of interest in diversity, in like women in tech, women in video games, in film, and there are like companies that are advertising, companies that are working on those topics, and everyone loves to talk about it. But and they say, it's like, oh, we want to support the work that you do, that I think is amazing. But you, at this point, you don't support with just kind words. You support with actions, and those actions can be like funds, or they can be like, okay, I'm gonna set up a meeting because I think you need to meet this person, or I'm gonna invite you to this festival because I think your voice needs to be heard. But at this moment, I feel it's more like good ideas and good intentions.
Right.
There's no impact, and the impact has to be more than, okay, I'll give you coverage in a magazine or something like that. No, it's more than that, especially for the people that have the power to do that. And I found that the people that collaborate the most, that make this happen, are all some other independent creators as myself, that we get, we keep in touch, we invite each other to different festivals, and we exchange different projects, and we collaborate and we make all this happen. But it's, at least in my country, it's very difficult to get support from this.
I mean, I had read a couple. Well, I mean, why do you think that is? I mean, do you think it's that people are? Do you think that they are clueless about someone's struggle, or do you think they don't care? Do you think that they don't have the funds to spare? I mean, how much have you? I mean, I know these are all questions you can't really ask, but where do you perceive this sort of difference comes from?
I don't know. I think it varies from case to case. At some point, for example, when people, you get calls from companies and they want to support you, and the whole idea of supporting artists is still difficult for some companies. Artists or creators or people in tech as well, and they still, I think there's a lot of evolving to do with that, because I see the good intentions, and I don't really understand why is it so difficult to really transform that into an action. I think for most of the companies, they are exploring it. They never done it before, so when that happens, it's because you just found like the right person that believes in those actions, and maybe was benefited from those actions in the past. When someone helped you, you understand how much that means, and then you want to help others. And some companies need the first push to see how that goes. I think at first it's that. For some other like cultural institutions, I'm not that sure. I don't want to be mean.
No, I understand.
No, I don't know really. It's like sometimes sometimes they send the wrong people to those events, and what I do feel is like they pay more attention to people that are networking, or they're trying to sell something, than to independent creators or thinkers, or
Right.
to different voices that they are like used to sending 2 or 3 persons that are always have the same speech, and they're creating connections, than taking a chance on people.
Well, I wonder too. I mean, what are there extra challenges in trying to make yourself more visible as an advocate for VR, because it has the extra challenge of being this new, unproven thing, on top of just how hard it is in general to make connections and get opportunities?
Well, I think in my case, I don't see myself, as a VR creator per se, just that.
Right.
But I think it's the opposite. When it's something new, that helps a lot, because everyone wants to be part of something in that has to do with innovation. Everyone wants to be a pioneer. Everyone wants to break the rules. I think that helps. What doesn't really help, it's that most of these companies, they well, there's also like the gender issue. It's really hard for women in video games, in tech, in film, Uh, there are some programs and there are some festivals that are taking that into consideration, but I see a lot of lineups for different festivals, and when you're talking about like technology or VR, and there's just all men, and I think they need to make an effort and find the people.
Oh yeah, you had said that you had run into some pushback against the panel you had pitched because it had too many women or something. Is that right?
Yeah, but that's part of the policy that
Yeah,
they want
yeah.
to keep it balanced. So
Because you need to be diverse, right?
yeah, we have like my company is like running three different workshops. One is just to women. Another one is men and women, and the third one, it was going to be three women, and that was apparently too much. So it's 2 to 1. But at least, I mean, I think I was just kind of joking about it because I felt that it was
No, I know.
great. uh,
I know.
and I think it's a good policy. It's like, okay, there shouldn't be like um, all the panels shouldn't be like the same people, because it's not so much about having me represented, but like having the audience be feel represented by different
Right.
gender, by different professions, countries.
Backgrounds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you can connect.
Right. Well, um, I wonder too, I mean, from what you've heard about the gatekeeping that takes place about VR, I mean, because it comes from, it's part film, part tech. For some people, it's also part games. I mean, I had read a few data points, and one of them was that in tech, companies with a female founder performed 63% better than investments with all male founding teams, and in film, that females in the film industry were generally given smaller budgets and lower salaries, even though they brought in greater returns for investors than their male counterparts. So I guess I'm just curious, I mean, from what you've heard in VR, does it feel like the same sort of gatekeeping that's taking place in tech and film, or is it its own new type of gatekeeping?
I think it's the same, but also the good part is that this is starting, and we are more aware of all this, and it's still a small community of creators. There are a lot of independently organized groups that are trying to change that. There's a very active women in VR group, and they are like all the time sharing, speaking opportunities, collaborating with each other. And since this is very new, I think I have faith that this can improve. Of course, it started as any other industry with the same issues, but I think it's still new, and also a small community, and that at some point it will, yeah, it will find its. I hope it will find its balance. I think it's the right time for that.
Okay, well, this will be my last question for you, which is just what's something you've learned in your creative work that has wound up being a life lesson?
Huh. I think it has to do with the impact of stories. Um, when I first started studying to be a filmmaker, I was studying in image and sound design school. So I was sharing like the same building with people that were studying to be architects or graphic designers. And for me, when I started, I was like, it's great that I'm studying what I'm studying, because I couldn't deal with the possibility of, for example, studying medicine and having someone died on me, or being an architect and having a building uh, collapsing because of my mistakes. And at that moment, I thought, well, the worst thing that can happen is like I can make a bad movie, and that's it. And that was
Yeah.
when I was 18. That was my idea of how much I could cope with that responsibility. And then I completely understood by experience the power of great communication and the power of seeing yourself represented in a film or any type of medium. Uh, what you can see happening in stories, let's say that it's stories in film, VR, gaming, and you can see a hero overcoming something, or you can see a possibility of a character uh, assuming a role that is difficult or is not existing in your society. I think that idea
Yeah.
of representation, it's huge, and we don't really understand the amazing impact those stories have, and how much we can affect, for good or bad, someone by sharing a story. And I learned all that when I was one of my first big projects was shooting a documentary in Brazil in the slums of Rio de Janeiro. Um, I remember spending like a month and a half there in very difficult conditions, and we were shooting a documentary about kids learning to surf in that environment. Um, I remember working with these 12-year-old kids, and they would ask me, like, what can I be? Who can I be when I grow up? And they were asking me. I was a foreigner making movies, like, and I remember telling him, like, you can be whoever you want. You can be whatever you want. And he asked me, can I be a pro surfer? Can I, make a living out of surfing? And I said, yes, of course. And this kid was just starting. He was not really good at it.
Yeah.
And he's been surfing for a month or so. And I remember during the shoot of the documentary, he kept singing like a song saying, I'm going to be a pro surfer. I'm going to be a pro surfer all the time, all the time, all the time. And when we left, uh, he he said to me and to the teams, I don't want you guys to leave, because you were here and you were listening to us. Not only you were telling our story, but you were listening to us. And that was heartbreaking. But I talked to the guy, I would say 2 years later, and he's a pro surfer.
Really?
Yeah. And he's amazing, and he's working in school teaching other kids to surf. And for me, it's like helping those kids rewrite their own stories. It's like their own mental stories. Like, who can you be? Those kids felt important because they were on a documentary, but also they felt important because we were there listening to be able to tell their
Yeah.
stories. And that, for me, I'm not taking credit for that. I'm taking credit for how a person can rewrite their own personal story and be whoever they want. And that, for me, really, really affected me in terms of, okay, the stories I'm telling can change the world and can change um, someone's perspective on life, and have impact. Maybe I'm not in a war, saving lives, but they have impact, and that's, for me, that was a life lesson, and that's what made me fall in love with stories, and understand and accept the responsibility of telling good stories.